الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Good evening. This video which I'm posting is an extension of my paper which touches upon a topic which today can be considered somewhat taboo. The question posed was, what was life like for Christians under Ottoman Muslim domination? My reason for the previous comment regarding the topic's taboo nature is in regards to sort of the simple fact that some areas of the world today are in a type, and when I mean a type, I mean not Ottoman as such, but perhaps in regards to modern nation states like Malaysia, Syria, Iran and others, which are under the banner of a type of Islamic domination where either Sharia law rules or the populace consists of a majority of Muslims. Anyway, along with the question, to sum up my own little conclusion here, in the end of the day, history is not a precise science. Research can only be done according to what is given. We can analyze the texts unbiasedly as much as possible, but in the end of the day, the author of these sources are writing according to their own contexts, their own opinions, and their own biases. Therefore, fairly, I have come to the conclusion that life under Ottoman Muslim domination cannot really be given a specific description, or a title or mood as such. Instead, we can make the statement that life was multifaceted for Christians and other faiths, especially under the Ottomans. It simply depended on various factors, whether it being the state of the empire or the Sultan at the time, whether or not he favoured or tolerated Christians. It could be dependent on the political situation regarding a region of the empire at the time, economic crises, things like that. We see many times in history where Christians were tolerated and even respected amongst their fellow Ottoman Muslims, and vice versa. A famous work by the Byzantine historian Michael Kritovolos is entirely ascribed to how awesome Mehmet the Conqueror is, how great his policies are, his personality is. He makes such a contrast between the former Byzantine rule and the current Ottoman rule, clearly showing favour towards the Ottomans for, and I quote, saving from famine, saving the people from famine, sickness and decay. It's almost practically presented like a schoolgirl diary on her crush. Just kidding. Anyway, back to my sort of concluding statement, we can say here that there are times of leniency, again, towards the Christians and the Jewish populace, being respected as first and foremost people of the same book, as in the lineage of Adam and Abraham and the prophets and so forth. Sometimes being granted even positions of high status in society. There were points where the Ottoman Sultan's closest advisors were Christian men. Soldiers of the Ottoman fleets were Christians. Leaders and at times politicians in certain regions of the empire were Christians. Let's not forget too that ultimately they had their own state of affairs. They were allowed to run their own policies under the Rum Millet, which is actually quite unusual in the eyes of today, that they could run their own affairs like that. So first and foremost, pertaining firstly to this modern thought that, we suffered like slaves under the Turks for 500 years, etc., etc. Therefore, we have a reason to hate them. This is the modern Greek thought. that we seem to have in today's society. It's actually quite incorrect. This only incites more division between people. It is only important that in the end of the day, first and foremost, we are Christians. Christians love, they forgive. And we can remedy this thought actually here and say that in fact there were times of cohesive existence, both on a higher societal level and a lower societal level, as in between the villages and then between the higher positions. Then also, unfortunately, we have to look at the other side of this in a contrasting light. We can say definitively also that Christians, period, did not have the same rights as Muslims. They were in fact widely accepted as a second-class race within the Ottoman Empire. And throughout the empire's history, the Christians, as well as the Jews and other sort of faiths, were subjected to harsh treatments, taxations, obstructions of basic human rights. By this, I can refer to one example, the Devishmir. The Devishmir, in short, was a policy that was constantly in motion throughout the reign of the empire, originally effective as of 1363 under Sultan Amurath I. Devishmir, as originally purposed, was the action of forcibly removing Christian children from their homes, placing them within the royal setting, usually in the royal palace, where they were to be groomed, trained, undergo harsh conditions, and 99% of the time forced conversion. So that ultimately resulted in the brainwashing of these children, turning them into the ultimate Islamic war weapon, the Janissaries. These people were specifically trained soldiers, heavily built in armor, with the sole purpose of invading Christian lands and enforcing enslavement upon its own populace. How ironic. This, you can say at times, even was the least of their worries. In history, unfortunately, there were also times when Christians really faced harsher persecutions, especially towards the end of the Ottoman Empire. A lot of pressure was on the empire, especially with, the new Turkish civil war on the rise. This ultimately led to the first known systematic extermination of an entire populace. The point of this was to keep the Ottoman nation stable, to remove any religious threat. Though these genocides were mainly continued by the Young Turks under Kemal Atatürk, there was evidence of activity of genocide before that. I can specifically mention one of the worst examples was between 1894 and 1896, where a series of ethno-religious anti-Christian pogroms known as the Hamidian massacres occurred. These killings were conducted against the Armenian and the Assyrian Christian populations by the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Abdul Hamid II, I believe. The motives for these massacres were really an attempt to reassert pan-Islamism to the populace, to reinforce the resentment towards the ancient indigenous Christian communities, and sort of get rid of this built-up political fear that there's a chance that they will take over and secede from the unstable empire. We actually, and I believe it's worth mentioning, have an account from William Schachleben, an American journalist who happened to be in Erzurum after the massacre there in 1895. He recounts the grisly scene, and I just want to recap. He wrote about it in the Times, and I just want to quote it. What I myself saw this Friday afternoon, as of November the 1st, is forever engraven on my mind as the most horrible sight a man can see. Along the wall on the north lay 321 dead bodies of the massacred Armenians. Many were fearfully mangled and mutilated. I saw one with his face completely smashed in with a blow of some heavy weapon after he was killed. I saw with their own necks, almost severed by a sword cut. One I saw whose whole chest had been skinned. His forearms were cut off, while the upper arm was skinned of the flesh. A dozen bodies were half burnt. All the corpses had been rifled of their own clothes, except a cotton undergarment on two. To be killed in a battle by brave men is one thing, but to be butchered by cowardly armed soldiers in cold blood and utterly defenseless, it's another thing. So, by a general overview here, we can already come to the conclusion that we just simply cannot answer this question merely by a statement. Life at times was fair, and life at times was harsh, cruel. History will always be truly unsure, simply because we don't have the full context of a situation. There's no evidence which can ever give a historical moment full factual context. I just want to make one concluding remark, which can, I believe, be made here, and I find it extremely important to relate what was said aforementioned to the particular point. There is proof of a coexistent, cohesive society. People of different religions can live together in one nation. Are the Christians of the Ottoman Empire a perfect example of this? No, but there are aspects of this example that we can actually take. Like we mentioned before, the high societal cohesive structures and the lower societal cohesive structures. Just like we can also learn from aspects of our relationship today with people of other belief systems. And there are things that we can improve on too. In the end of the day, it simply does remain up to each individual how they receive others in their own day-to-day lives, meaning both ways. In remembrance on the part of a Christian, is that always that our duty is to follow to the best of our capabilities that in which the Lord commanded us to do. Love one another. How? Just like the immortal God-man actually bent over and washed the feet of a mere mortal. That is also the level which we should attempt to grow to. This is what we are all called to do as Christians. To be a little more loving, to be a little more respectful, to be a little bit more open, patient, kind. Perhaps by these little changes alone and the hope, we have in our prayers for the peace of the world, we can remember the past and change the future.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا